Hello and welcome to Talking Tolkien for part 5 of Frodo's journey. At the end of the last chapter, the Black Riders attacked the company as they were crossing the ford of Brunnen. A huge flood appeared on the river, dismounting and washing the riders away. It was at that point that Frodo lost consciousness, ending Book 1 in Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. After all the events of Frodo's journey so far, things take a more relaxing turn as we rejoin Frodo waking up here in Rivendell, opening his eyes to the surprising sight of Gandalf the Grey sat at the end of his bed. Frodo's informed that after he lost consciousness, the company carried him on Glorfindel's horse up the high moors and into Rivendell, where he arrived late in the night of October 20th. Today, the day which he woke up, is October the 24th, and the skill of Elrond has helped him recover from the wound inflicted on Weathertop. So here's Gandalf, safe and sound after all, and this is like looking into a mirror. There's Frodo Baggins. Gandalf moved his chair to the bedside and took a good look at Frodo. The colour had come back to his face, and his eyes were clear and fully awake and aware. He was smiling, and there seemed to be little wrong with him, but to the wizard's eye there was a faint change, just a hint as it were of transparency about him, and especially about the left hand that lay outside upon the coverlet. Frodo was now safe in the last homely house east of the sea. That house was, as Bilbo had long ago reported, a perfect house, whether you like food or sleep or storytelling or singing, or just sitting and thinking best, or a pleasant mixture of them all. Merely to be there was a cure for weariness, fear and sadness. As the evening drew on, Frodo woke up again, and he found that he was no longer in need of rest or sleep, but had a mind for food and drink, and probably for singing and storytelling afterwards. He got out of bed and discovered that his arm was already nearly as useful again as it had ever been. He found laid ready clean garments of green cloth that fitted him excellently. Looking in a mirror, he was startled to see a much thinner reflection of himself than he remembered. It looked remarkably like the young nephew of Bilbo who used to go tramping with his uncle in the Shire, but the eyes looked out at him thoughtfully. "Yes, you have seen a thing or two since you last peeped out of a looking-glass," he said to his reflection, "but now for a merry meeting." He stretched out his arms and whistled a tune. Here is what Tolkien says about Gandalf when Frodo meets him at the feast in Elrond's house. Gandalf was shorter in stature than the other two, but his long white hair, his sweeping silver beard and his broad shoulders made him look like some wise king of ancient legend. In his aged face under great snowy brows his dark eyes were set like coals that could leap suddenly into fire. Also present at the feast was Glorfindel, who was tall and straight. His hair was of shining gold, his face fair and young and fearless and full of joy. His eyes were bright and keen, and his voice like music. On his brow sat wisdom, and in his hand was strength. And Elrond himself? The face of Elrond was ageless, neither old nor young, though in it was written the memory of many things both glad and sorrowful. His hair was dark as the shadows of twilight, and upon it was set a circlet of silver. His eyes were grey as a clear evening, and in them was a light like the light of stars. Venerable he seemed as a king crowned with many winters, and yet hale as a tried warrior in the fullness of his strength. He was the Lord of Rivendell, and mighty among both elves and men. Another unfamiliar but unforgettable face to Frodo was a lady fair to look upon, and so like was she in form of womanhood to Elrond that Frodo guessed that she was one of his close kindred. Young she was, and yet not so. The braids of her dark hair were touched by no frost, her white arms and clear face were flawless and smooth, and the light of stars was in her bright eyes, grey as a cloudless night. Yet queenly she looked, and thought and knowledge were in her glance, as of one who has known many things that the years bring. Above her brow her head was covered with a cap of silver lace, netted with small gems glittering white, but her soft grey raiment had no ornament save a girdle of leaves wrought in silver. So it was that Frodo saw her, whom few mortals had yet seen, Arwen, daughter of Elrond, in whom it was said that the likeness of Luthien had come on earth again, and she was called Undolmiel, for she was the even star of her people. Long had she been in the land of her mother's kin, in Lorien, beyond the mountains, and was but lately returned to Rivendell to her father's house. Such loveliness in living thing Frodo had never seen before, nor imagined in his mind. After the feast, Frodo was led by Gandalf to the Hall of Fire. As Elrond entered and went towards the seat prepared for him, elvish minstrels began to make sweet music. Slowly the hall filled, and Frodo looked with delight upon the many fair faces that were gathered together. The golden firelight played upon them and shimmered in their hair. Suddenly he noticed, not far from the further end of the fire, a small dark figure seated on a stool with his back propped against a pillar. Behind him on the ground was a drinking cup and some bread. Frodo wondered whether he was ill, if people were ever ill in Rivendell, and had been unable to come to the feast. His head seemed sunk in sleep on his breast, and a fold of his dark cloak was drawn over his face. Elrond went forward and stood beside the silent figure. "Awake, little master," he said with a smile. Then turning to Frodo, he beckoned to him. "Now at last the hour has come that you have wished for, Frodo," he said. "Here is a friend that you have long missed." The dark figure raised its head and uncovered its face. "Bilbo!" cried Frodo with sudden recognition, and he sprang forward. "Hello, Frodo, my lad," said Bilbo. "So you've got here at last. I hoped you would manage it. Well, well. So all this feasting is in your honour, I hear. I hope you enjoyed yourself." The next day Frodo woke early, feeling refreshed and well. He walked along the terraces above the loud-flowing Brunnen and watched the pale, cool sun rise above the far mountains and shine down, slanting through the thin silver mist. The dew upon the yellow leaves was glimmering, and the woven nets of gossamer twinkled on every bush. Sam walked beside him, saying nothing, but sniffing the air, and looking every now and again with wonder in his eyes at the great heights in the east. The snow was white upon their peaks. This was the day of the Council of Elrond, where a plan of action for how to deal with the One Ring was decided. As well as Frodo, Gandalf, Elrond, Strider and Glorfindel, at the meeting were a younger dwarf at Glow-Inside, his son Gimli, a strange elf clad in green and brown, Legolas, a messenger from his father Thranduil, the king of the elves of northern Mirkwood, and seated a little apart was a tall man with a fair and noble face, dark-haired and grey-eyed, proud and stern of glance. He was cloaked and booted as if for a journey on horseback, and indeed, though his garments were rich and his cloak was lined with fur, they were stained with long travel. He had a collar of silver in which a single white stone was set. His locks were shorn about his shoulders. On a baldric he wore a great horn tipped with silver that was now laid upon his knees. He gazed at Frodo and Bilbo with sudden wonder. "Here," said Elrond, turning to Gandalf, "is Boromir, a man from the south. He arrived in the grey morning and seeks for counsel." After much discussion it was decided that the ring must be taken to the place it was forged, in Mount Doom, deep in Mordor, and cast into the fire where it would be destroyed. Frodo found himself volunteering to take the ring himself, as if some other will was using his small voice. Elrond raised his eyes and looked at him, and Frodo felt his heart pierced by the sudden keenness of the glance. "If I understand aright all that I have heard," he said, "I think that this task is appointed for you, Frodo, and that if you do not find a way, no one will. This is the hour of the Shire folk, when they arise from their quiet fields to shake the towers and councils of the great. Who of all the wise could have foreseen it? Or, if they are wise, why should they expect to know it until the hour has struck?" The hobbits stayed at Rivendell for almost 2 peaceful months before Elrond declared to Frodo that the time had come. And so Frodo, Gandalf, Aragorn, Boromir, Legolas, Gimli, as well as the hobbits Sam, Merry and Pippin, were announced as the Fellowship of the Ring, who would accompany Frodo for as long as they were able. Many others of Elrond's household stood in the shadows and watched them go, bidding them farewell with soft voices. There was no laughter and no song or music. At last they turned away and faded silently into the dusk. They crossed the bridge and wound slowly up the long steep paths that led out of the cloven vale of Rivendell, and they came at length to the high moor where the wind hissed through the heather. Then with one glance at the last homely house twinkling below them, they strode away, far into the night. So as Frodo and the Fellowship climb up the high moor out of Rivendell, we'll conclude this chapter 5 of Frodo's journey. Just to give a quick idea of the kind of time frame since Frodo left Bag End, that happened on September 23rd. They arrived at Rivendell on October 20th, and the night of their departure, seen here, was December 25th. So that's it. I hope you've enjoyed this peaceful diversion in Rivendell. If so, like and subscribe to my channel, where I'll be continuing Frodo's journey as the company now head for the Hollin Ridge and the Redhorn Pass. Once again, thanks for watching Talking Tolkien.